Hey guys, tonight we ease into one of those journeys that sounds heroic on parchment, but feels mostly like aching feet and stale bread. You're setting out on a medieval pilgrimage, shoes already worn thin, and your pack bulging with the bare minimum. A hunk of coarse bread, maybe a wedge of hard cheese, and the faint hope that you'll find both mercy and a softer mattress along the way. The road stretches dusty before you, marked by ruts from countless carts, and the crowd of fellow pilgrims shifts and murmurs like an endless river of wool cloaks and leather satchels. Of course, in reality, you probably wouldn't survive this kind of trek. 2 days in, your blisters alone would apply for sainthood. But here, in the comfort of your own bed, you just get to imagine the sounds of wooden wheels creaking, the jangle of a donkey's harness, and the smell of campfires drifting over evening meadows. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and the local time in the comments. I love knowing where in the world you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You place one careful step after another, leaving behind the crooked rooftops of your town. The church bells you heard at dawn still echo faintly in your mind, a solemn reminder that you're walking toward holiness, or at least toward a series of shrines claiming to dispense holiness for the right donation. Historians still argue whether most pilgrims were deeply devout or just curious travelers escaping boredom back home. You, for your part, feel both impulses simmering, an equal mix of piety and wanderlust. The smell of tilled earth follows you out into open fields, where peasants bent at the waist tend barley crops. They glance up briefly as the line of pilgrims trudges past, probably wondering how many of you will be robbed before nightfall. A rooster crows in the distance, belated and confused. It seems no one told him the day had already begun. You adjust the strap of your pack and take in the scenery. Low hedges alive with sparrows, muddy ditches buzzing with frogs, and a faint track of wagon wheels guiding you forward. Mainstream history tells us that by the 12th century, tens of thousands of people across Europe were making these pilgrimages every year. Kings went, peasants went, even people pretending to be blind went, hoping a miracle would cure them once the right relic was kissed or touched. Somewhere behind you, a man sneezes loudly into his sleeve. A voice from the crowd jokes that saints might be able to cure souls, but not hay fever. You chuckle, realizing even medieval pilgrims had their moments of sarcastic banter. One fringe tidbit you overhear later in the day is that some travelers carried pebbles in their mouths to keep themselves from getting too thirsty. It sounds strange, but maybe that's the original version of a motivational water bottle. The sun climbs higher, and the road grows hot underfoot. Dust coats your sandals, turning your toes a uniform beige. You pass a crossroads marked with a wooden signpost so warped by time it points nowhere useful, like a medieval GPS that only says recalculating. Still, you follow the crowd, trusting that someone at the front knows more geography than you do. Along the roadside, shrines already appear, small stone alcoves with painted icons of saints, tiny donation slots, and flickering candles that somehow survive the breeze. A widow kneels before one, muttering a prayer for her husband's soul. You wonder briefly if he was saintly or if she's just hedging her bets. Pilgrims toss a few coins into the box, and you notice the way the slot is worn smooth by thousands of offerings before yours. the day stretches endlessly. You find yourself cataloging details: the shape of a farmer's hat, the way his oxen's tails swish, the rattle of a child's toy carved from bone. Someone nearby begins singing a hymn in a voice that's both off-key and strangely comforting. The melody drifts over the group, pulling your thoughts away from sore feet toward some hazy horizon where supper surely awaits. By evening, the path dips toward a copse of trees, and you catch the first sight of smoke curling from a distant tavern chimney. The thought of warm broth and a rough wooden bench feels like paradise. For now, you keep walking, each step a reminder that this journey is less about rushing and more about surrendering to the rhythm of the road itself.
The dusty paths stretch on, a mottled patchwork of ruts and hoofprints carved into the earth by centuries of traffic. You shuffle along carefully, avoiding the deeper grooves where cartwheels have sunk so often that they form miniature valleys. Each step kicks up pale clouds that cling to your cloak and lodge in your throat. You cough, then notice you're not alone. The entire procession of pilgrims has developed a shared rasp, like a choir of wheezing bagpipes. The crossroads soon appear ahead. A bare wooden post, its arms etched with names of towns and lettering that looks like it was hacked with a dull knife. One sign points vaguely toward a place you've never heard of. Another leans so far to the left it might be advertising the next ditch. Historians still argue whether medieval signposts were genuinely helpful or mostly decorative, but as you squint at the faded script, you lean toward the latter. At the meeting of the roads, you encounter the day's parade of travelers. A group of merchants trundle by with their mule train, sacks of wool bouncing against the animal's sides. The beasts themselves seem unimpressed with the spiritual energy of the crowd, flicking their ears dismissively at anyone who dares come close. The merchants are your little group, calculating whether any of you might have a few coins worth extracting later in the evening. A little further along, you hear the jangle of harnesses and see a traveling troupe of tinkers hauling pots, pans, and kettles. They rattle like an offbeat drum line, every step punctuated by metallic clatter. You imagine how infuriating it would sound at bedtime, but here on the open road, it becomes a kind of traveling soundtrack. One of the tinkers winks at you, holding up a dented pan and declaring it almost new. You're tempted to ask if he accepts Pilgrim discount cards, but you bite your tongue. A breeze shifts, bringing with it the smell of livestock. Soon you find a reason. A farmer leading a pair of sheep, their fleeces stained with streaks of mud. One animal gives you a baleful stare, as though blaming you personally for every flea it has to endure. You pat your pouch, relieved that you didn't pack wool socks. Medieval socks, by the way, were often just strips of cloth wound round and round the foot. A fun fact, some pilgrims allegedly went barefoot the entire way, believing each blister was an extra prayer. You decide the saints can have their prayers without your blisters. Thank you very much. The landscape widens into open fields, the horizon broken by copses of trees and the occasional stone cross standing sentinel at the edge of the path. A crow perches on one cross, tilting its head in judgment as you pass. For a second, you imagine it squawking in Latin just to remind you that even birds were better educated than most peasants. The afternoon sun beats down relentlessly. Pilgrims shuffle from one patch of shade to another, crowding under oak trees like oversized chickens in a coop. A knight traveling without armor, because he wants to haul 50 pounds of metal across muddy tracks, complains loudly about the dust ruining his fine cloak. A barefoot mystic nearby simply smiles, dust coating his beard like powdered sugar. The contrast is almost comical. One man moaning about fabric, the other pretending dust is divine seasoning. Along the roadside, you notice crude carvings in the wood of a milestone. Hearts, crosses, initials, all etched by bored travelers. Some depict little shoes with exaggerated soles, perhaps the medieval equivalent of leaving graffiti like, "I was here, and so were my blisters." Historians still debate whether these carvings were idle doodles or symbolic blessings. You run your fingers over one groove and wonder how many weary hands have done the same. The road is never quiet. There are donkey brays, the clink of coins as traders shift their purses, the shrill laughter of children darting between adults. One boy skips stones into a drainage ditch, hitting more frogs than water. His mother scolds him gently, but you notice she can't help smiling. Every so often, you come across a wayside cross or shrine, adorned with wilted flowers and dribbles of candle wax hardened by the sun. Pilgrims pause to mutter prayers, while you eye the donation slot already stuffed with coppers. You're pretty sure at least one local thief considers this a reliable side hustle. A little further down the path, you spot a traveling entertainer. He balances a jug on his head while playing a pipe, clearly angling for coins for passersby. The jug tips, clatters down, and nearly flattens a pilgrim's bread loaf. The crowd laughs, tossing him a few pennies for the effort. The man bows theatrically, then starts all over again. As evening nears, the road dips into a valley. The dust settles into a golden haze, turning even muddy travelers into shimmering silhouettes. For a fleeting moment, you feel as though the whole line of pilgrims has been woven into some long medieval tapestry, each face a stitch in a story too vast to comprehend. Then your sandal strap breaks, and you're yanked straight back into the practical reality of sore toes and a night spent hoping for decent stew. You limp onward, sandal strap clumsily knotted, until the smell of wood smoke pulls you forward. The road narrows, and ahead you glimpse the crooked roofline of an inn, its wattle and daub walls sagging as though the whole structure has been tired for centuries. A painted sign hangs from a bent iron hook, depicting what might be a boar or perhaps a very lumpy dog. Either way, the sight is welcome. You're about to enter the world of medieval inns, ale, and stew of suspicious origins. The yard outside is alive with noise. Chickens scratch in the mud, a dog barks at everything that moves, and a stable boy half your size attempts to wrangle a horse far too big for him. Pilgrims and merchants cluster by the doorway, waiting their turn to squeeze into the smoky common room. Inns in this era weren't luxurious. They were usually one large hall where travelers sat shoulder to shoulder, sleeping later on whatever patch of floor remained once the tables were shoved aside. Historians still argue whether these places were truly hospitable or merely tolerated because there were so few alternatives. Inside, the air is thick with smoke, grease, and laughter. The rafters are blackened from decades of open fires, and a single window is too choked with grime to let in much light. You slide onto a rough bench, immediately regretting the splinters, but grateful to be off your feet. A weary innkeeper slams down bowls of stew that smell like yesterday's onions reheated with generous helpings of turnip. Meat, if it exists at all, hides in stringy shreds at the bottom. You take a spoonful, chew carefully, and wonder if you've just encountered the first medieval mystery meat. Next to you, a merchant boasts loudly about a deal he struck that afternoon, while a barefoot pilgrim across the table mutters a prayer before spooning stew into his mouth. The innkeeper ladles ale into wooden cups. It's warm, frothy, and sour, probably safer than water, though your tongue insists otherwise. Someone cracks a joke that this brew could kill fleas faster than holy water. The table erupts in laughter, and you join in, realizing that in the haze of smoke and chatter, nobody cares whether the ale is good as long as it flows. On the wall, you notice charms and trinkets nailed up by previous travelers. Scalloped shells, wooden crosses, even a small leather pouch. Some say leaving these behind ensures safe passage. Others claim it's just a clever way for innkeepers to decorate without paying for art. One quirky tidbit: certain inns reportedly offered pilgrim specials, serving simple bread and ale for a fixed donation to the church. You scan your stew suspiciously, not entirely convinced this falls into that charitable category. The crowd around you grows louder as the night stretches. A fiddler strikes up a tune, squeaky but cheerful, and soon half the room stomps in rhythm. The merchant beside you insists you join in, clapping your blistered hands until they sting. A knight further down the bench slams his mug onto the table, shouting a half-remembered song about St. James that degenerates into nonsense halfway through. You can't help grinning, though your eyelids grow heavy. In a corner, you spot a group of monks quietly sipping their ale. They keep mostly to themselves, but one suddenly sneezes so loudly it rattles the cups. Everyone laughs, and even the monks chuckle, proving that divine humor still trickled into earthly taverns. Historians still debate whether monks were supposed to drink in publicans at all. If the rule existed, clearly nobody was enforcing it tonight. As the fire dies low, the innkeeper shoves tables against the wall. Blankets, or what pass for blankets, are tossed down. Travelers claim their patches of floor with the possessiveness of cats, curling around their bundles of belongings. You too, spread your cloak in the corner, nose still full of smoky stew, stomach rumbling despite the meal. Above you, beams creak, and you wonder if tomorrow the road will smell better than onions. Probably not. For now, you close your eyes, listening to the snoring chorus rising around you. Each rumble a reminder that even weary strangers find a kind of communion in their shared discomfort. You drift in and out, the flicker of the dying fire painting the last images of the night. Shadows moving, mugs clinking, and the faint smell of burnt turnip stew that will haunt your dreams. Morning breaks not with birdsong, but with the sound of boots thudding and pilgrims muttering as they jostle for the doorway. You rub your eyes, still heavy from broken sleep, and stretch limbs stiff from the cold floorboards. The innkeeper sweeps through with a broom that looks more ceremonial than effective, nudging sleepers toward the exit like an impatient shepherd. Outside, mist curls low over the fields, carrying with it the faint toll of a distant church bell. That sound alone is enough to stir the talk of relics and miracles, as though the bell were advertising holiness. As you trudge back onto the road, conversations swell around you. Pilgrims whisper excitedly about saints' bones housed in a nearby chapel, about wells that heal blindness, about a feather from an angel locked in a jeweled reliquary. You listen skeptically, though you admit the idea of magical water fixing your sore ankles is tempting. Historians still argue whether pilgrims truly believed these tales or treated them as part of the entertainment of travel. After all, long journeys are easier when sprinkled with a little miracle marketing. By midday, you reach a roadside shrine buzzing with chatter. It's little more than a stone alcove, but inside sits a golden box said to contain a finger bone of Saint somebody or other. A monk stationed there assures you of its authenticity, though you can't help noticing the box is big enough to hide several finger bones. Either the saint had hands like shovels, or a few extra relics have snuck in over time. One fringe tidbit claims some relic sellers were so enterprising that they offered splinters of the true cross by the cartload. So many that if all were genuine, the cross would have been taller than a cathedral. Pilgrims crowd forward, dropping coins into a carved chest before touching the reliquary. The monk rings a bell, chanting blessings that mix solemnity with a practiced rhythm. You edge closer, noticing the smell of beeswax candles burning low in the alcove. For a moment, you place your hand on the golden box, half expecting a thunderbolt of divine energy. Instead, you mostly feel the warm press of sun on metal. Still, the effect on the crowd is undeniable. Faces soften, shoulders loosen, and even the grumbling knight from yesterday looks almost cheerful. Rumors ripple outward from the shrine like ripples in a pond. Someone insists a child was healed here last week, their limp vanishing after a single prayer. Another pilgrim claims his cousin's cousin drank from a holy well nearby and immediately grew back a tooth. You nod politely, though you suspect the story has been polished smoother than a pebble in a stream. Historians still debate whether any recorded cures were genuine, placebo, or outright fiction, but you can't deny the stories give people hope, and sometimes that's worth more than proof. The road continues, flanked now by tiny chapels sprouting like mushrooms. Each has its own relic, its own story. a vial of saint's blood that curdled if liars approached, a cloak said to have shielded a martyr from rain, even a skull reputed to glow faintly in moonlight. You peek into one chapel and find the relic in question is a slightly lopsided wooden bowl. The caretaker insists it once belonged to a bishop, though you can't shake the suspicion it belonged to his grandmother's kitchen instead. As evening nears, you overhear pilgrims debating the most important relics. Santiago de Compostela, Canterbury, or the scattered shrines dotting every crossroads. Their arguments sound a lot like modern travelers comparing which theme park ride is best. You smile, realizing humanity has always loved ranking experiences, whether it's relics, roller coasters, or restaurants. The line of pilgrims winds into a clearing where a makeshift campsite blooms. Fires crackle, bread is torn, and water is boiled with herbs that smell faintly of hay. Sitting down, you glance at your own pouch, still light on coins, but heavier now with the faint feeling of having touched something sacred. Or perhaps just something suspiciously polished. Either way, the rhythm of relics and rumors carries you onward, like a current pulling you towards shrines still waiting ahead. The next morning you shuffle forward with the crowd, and just as your stomach begins to rumble again, the smell of resin and sawdust wafts from a cluster of wooden stalls along the roadside. These are not farms or taverns. They're pilgrim markets, the glittering, clattering heart of your journey. Trinket sellers have set up shop, each table creaking under the weight of scallop shells, pewter badges, tin saints, and other curiosities. You've arrived at the medieval equivalent of a souvenir strip. The air hums with bargaining voices. A woman in a patched cloak waves scallop shells at passers-by, crying that each has been blessed by a bishop, though you notice they're stacked in baskets like common seafood. Historians still argue whether these shells were truly from sacred shores or simply hauled in bulk from any coastline. Either way, the symbol mattered. A shell pinned to your cloak declared to all that you were a pilgrim on a holy errand. Next to her, a craftsman hammers pewter into small badges. Tiny images of saints, swords, or shrines. His hands are black with soot, and his apprentice keeps dropping molds in the mud. You pick one up, brushing it off, wondering how many thousands of these little pins have been churned out for weary travelers. They were affordable, portable proof that you had made it at least this far. Imagine, in modern terms, buying a t-shirt at every gas station you pass, except the shirt might also be considered a spiritual receipt. Further down, a seller dangles tin medallions shaped like miniature churches. He assures you that wearing one will ward off sickness. You glance at his own coughing fit and quietly decide maybe not. A fringe tidbit drifts through the crowd. Some stalls supposedly sold bottled holy air or sacred dust collected from pilgrimage sites. Whether anyone actually bought these is debated, but you suspect at least one poor soul did, only to find it indistinguishable from any backyard dirt. Children dart between legs, tugging at cloaks and begging for pennies to spend. One boy triumphantly shows off a wooden cross small enough to fit in his palm. He pretends it glows in the sunlight, squinting dramatically as if blinded by divine rays. You laugh, remembering how every trinket, no matter how ordinary, takes on extra magic when carried far from home. The market is more than stalls. It's a theater of characters. A haggard old woman chants blessings in exchange for coins, sprinkling herbs that smell suspiciously like weeds from the nearest ditch. A young man strums a lute, singing about St. George slaying dragons, his melody competing with the cries of sellers hawking relics. And there, at the edge, a toothless peddler waves what he swears is a saint's fingernail. You look closer. It might just be a chicken claw. Mainstream accounts of medieval travel remind us that these markets thrived because pilgrims wanted proof of their journeys. Trinkets served as both talismans and bragging rights. You can picture villagers back home crowding around you, staring in awe at your pewter badge, even if it was bought for the medieval equivalent of pocket change. Historians still debate whether such tokens held true spiritual weight or merely commercial gimmicks. Likely, they were both. You wander from stall to stall, fingering shells and charms. The craftsmanship varies wildly. Some pieces delicate, others so crude they barely resemble their subjects. But each has a story, whispered or shouted by the seller. This badge touched the shrine at Canterbury. This shell comes from Santiago. This cross once hung in the cathedral crypt. Are they all true? Probably not. But when you're miles from home, every story has the power to slip into belief. At last you give in, handing over a coin for a pewter badge shaped like a scallop. It's bent slightly, the saint's face distorted into something resembling a frown. Still, you pin it to your cloak proudly, feeling a little lighter for having joined the throng of adorned pilgrims. A knight passing by notices and nods approvingly, as though you've joined a club that requires blisters as admission. The sun dips lower, painting the trinkets in gold. Sellers pack their goods, tying bundles with fraying rope. You shuffle onward, badge clinking faintly against your cloak, knowing it will be one of many jangling souvenirs before journey's end. Trinkets may not heal your feet or soothe your hunger, but they mark the rhythm of your progress, proof that you have walked, paused, believed, if only for the price of a single coin. By the next stretch of the road, the romance of scallop shells and pewter badges gives way to the less glamorous realities of long-distance walking. Mud, endless mud. The sky has turned gray, the air damp, and your feet squelch miserably with each step. You look down to see your sandals caked in brown layers, so thick they've essentially become new shoes. Shoes entirely made of muck. Pilgrims around you groan, tugging at hems of soaked cloaks and trying not to lose a boot in the sucking earth. The road dips into a hollow where puddles gather like small lakes. A mule refuses to cross, staring at the water as if suspecting it hides sea monsters. Its owner pulls and shouts, while the beast plants its hooves firmly, winning the standoff. You carefully skirt the puddle, only to feel icy water leak in through a crack in your sandal anyway. You sigh. Medieval footwear, as history teaches us, was never designed with waterproofing in mind. One fringe tidbit. Some pilgrims swore by straw sandals, woven quickly and worn until they dissolved, sometimes in just a few miles. You see a woman now adjusting her pair, her toes poking through, straw unraveling like an abandoned bird's nest. It doesn't look comfortable, but at least the mud shakes free faster than from your leather straps. You can't help but think medieval shoe advertisements would have been very short. Will cover feet. Briefly, as the rain thickens, pilgrims begin wrapping strips of cloth around their feet, a desperate attempt at makeshift socks. Historians still argue whether actual knitted socks were common for the average traveler or whether they were luxuries reserved for wealthier feet. You decide not to argue. Your own soggy toes demand sympathy, not scholarship. The mud isn't your only foe. With dampness comes blisters. Every step rubs skin raw, and soon the group's conversation turns to remedies. Some swear by smearing pig fat between toes. Others claim cabbage leaves will soothe the pain. You try not to imagine what your pack would smell like if you carried that around. Still, the idea of cabbage-scented shoes might keep thieves at bay. The road narrows into a lane hemmed by hedges, offering little relief from the downpour. Water trickles down your cloak and sneaks into your collar, cold as betrayal. A pilgrim near you laughs bitterly, muttering that saints could at least arrange umbrellas. The joke spreads quickly, and soon half the group is chuckling between sneezes. Humor, you realize, is the only true shield on a wet pilgrimage. By midday, your stomach growls. You reach into your pouch for bread, only to discover it has transformed into a sponge, soaked with rainwater. You chew anyway, each bite tasting faintly of wet wood. A child beside you is luckier. His mother unrolls a cloth bundle to reveal surprisingly dry cheese. You eye it enviously, though the child guards it with the seriousness of a dragon hoarding treasure. As the path climbs a hill, you pause to catch your breath. Below stretches a line of pilgrims, trudging like ants through the mud. It's both pitiful and oddly majestic, a whole river of humanity moving stubbornly forward despite the weather's best efforts. Historians often remark on the sheer endurance of medieval travelers, many walking hundreds of miles with no promise of comfort along the way. Looking at the bedraggled group, you understand, persistence wasn't just a virtue, it was the only option. At the crest of a hill, a small wooden shelter comes into view, little more than a roof on posts. Pilgrims crowd beneath, dripping water like soaked dogs. Someone has started a small fire, smoke curling bravely into the wet air. You huddle close, toes steaming faintly as they dry, the smell of damp will filling the space. A friar jokes that with this much steam, you could cook a stew out of pilgrims themselves. Nobody volunteers to be the first ingredient. When the rain finally eases, you step back onto the road. Mud still clings, but the air feels lighter, the horizon brighter. The worst of it may have passed for now. You glance down at your sandals, marveling that they're still intact, and whisper a half-serious prayer of thanks. Miracles, you realize, sometimes come not in relics or trinkets, but in the simple fact that your feet still move at all. The rain has passed, but the blisters remain. Each step is a careful negotiation with your own feet, which now resemble pale, soggy lumps of dough stuffed into leather. Yet the rhythm of walking brings you closer to others, and soon the road fills with voices carrying more than complaints. Confessions slip out easily among strangers, as if the mud itself has loosened tongues. You find yourself beside a widow in her 40s, cloak patched neatly, rosary beads clutched in her hand. She speaks softly about her husband, lost to fever the year before. Her children, she says, are safe at home with her sister. She hopes the saints will pray for his soul, but you suspect she mostly wants the solace of walking among people who don't know his name. Historians still argue whether most pilgrims sought forgiveness, healing, or simply a change of scene. Listening to her, you realize it was often all three braided together. Further along, a knight in a mud-splattered tunic huffs beside his packhorse. He admits he once fought in France, though he speaks more of boredom than glory. Now he claims he seeks penance, but when pressed, he grins and says he mostly seeks better beer. A joke? Maybe, but you sense truth in it. After all, everyone walks for their own reasons, and good beer may rank higher than most clerics would like. Trailing behind is a barefoot mystic, beard matted, eyes bright as coals. He mutters prayers under his breath, clutching a wooden staff carved with odd symbols. Some pilgrims avoid him, uneasy about his fervor. You, curious, fall in a step beside him. He tells you that each blister he earns is a prayer carried heavenward, and each stone bruise is a message from God. You nod politely, though you can't help but wonder if he'd still feel that way with your sandals on. One quirky tidbit you've heard: mystics sometimes traveled with chains bound around their waists or shoulders, hidden under cloaks. Pain, to them, was a passport to holiness. The conversations weave together like threads in a tapestry. Pilgrims confess sins to strangers more freely than they ever would to their priests back home. A young merchant admits he cheated on weights at market. A servant girl whispers she took coins from her master's purse. A farmer laughs nervously about sneaking an extra chicken into his tithe basket, certain he'll be smote by lightning any moment now. You comfort him by pointing out the clouds look fairly calm. The rhythm of confession grows contagious. You catch yourself nearly blurting out the time you once lied about fasting just to eat cheese early. You stop, realizing even minor sins can sound foolish when spoken aloud. Still, the act of sharing seems to lighten everyone's steps, as if guilt itself were a stone being dropped by the roadside. Mainstream history tells us that medieval pilgrimages often doubled as social events, a chance to network, gossip, and exchange secrets under the cloak of religious duty. You witness it firsthand, friendships forming over shared blisters, laughter rising over shared stew. And yet, beneath the humor, there's an undeniable current of sincerity. Pilgrims may joke about beer and blisters, but each one still kneels at the roadside shrines, muttering prayers in the twilight. By evening, the group gathers at a meadow where smoke drifts from small campfires. Bread is broken, cheese shared, and someone pulls out a flask of wine. The widow sits near the flames. The knight dozes against his horse, and the mystic still chants, staring into the embers as if they hold celestial secrets. You wrap your cloak tighter, feeling both comforted and unsettled. Confessions shared on the road may never be heard again, but they linger in your mind like echoes. As stars prick the darkening sky, you lie back on the grass, feet throbbing less now, heart strangely lighter. You realize the pilgrimage is as much about the people you meet as the relics at the end. Every confession, every laugh, every whispered story, each one is a trinket of its own, carried not in your pouch but in memory. You wake to the sound of bells, not from a village square, but from the stone walls of a priory looming over the horizon. The path narrows as pilgrims funnel toward its gate, drawn like moths to the promise of free shelter and perhaps a meal that doesn't taste like damp turnip. The air smells faintly of wood smoke and freshly cut hay, mingling with the murmur of chanting that seeps through the thick walls. Tonight, you'll experience monastic hospitality, or at least the medieval version of it. The gates creak open, revealing a courtyard paved with uneven cobbles. Monks in rough brown habits shuffle forward, sandals slapping against stone. One gestures you inside with all the enthusiasm of a man guiding sheep into a pen. Hospitality, after all, was a monastic duty. Abbeys and priories were expected to shelter pilgrims. Historians still argue whether this generosity sprang from pure devotion or from a careful balancing act of politics and reputation. Either way, you're grateful to be on the receiving end. You're led into a long refectory, its air heavy with the scent of cabbage and smoke. Wooden benches line the hall, and pilgrims slide into seats like school children called to supper. A monk ladles soup into bowls, thin, watery, with occasional floating greens that look like weeds gathered from the nearest ditch. You sip cautiously. It's warm, at least, and you imagine the saints nodding approvingly at your humility in consuming what tastes suspiciously like boiled grass. Beside you, a merchant mutters about missing real stew. The barefoot mystic from earlier grins, declaring that plain soup purifies the soul. You roll your eyes, then choke down another mouthful anyway. One quirky tidbit: some monasteries reportedly served beer thicker than soup, claiming it was liquid bread. You eye the bowl before you and wish this were one of those establishments. After supper, monks usher everyone into the church for evening prayers. Candles flicker in iron sconces, shadows dancing across vaulted stone. You kneel on the hard floor, the sound of Latin chants rising around you. Even if you don't understand the words, the rhythm soothes, lulling you into a calm almost deeper than sleep. You peek at your fellow pilgrims, some devoutly bowed, others stifling yawns, and at least one snoring softly. The monk's chanting never falters, though you swear one of them is singing slightly off-key. Later, bedding is arranged in a side hall. Bedding is generous. It's mostly straw pallets lined against cold stone. You spread your cloak and collapse, grateful for any softness. Around you, the orchestra of snores begins, echoing under the high ceiling. The knight snores like a charging boar, the widow like a distant saw, and the mystic hums prayers even in his sleep. You tuck your ears under your cloak, wishing medieval monastic hospitality included complimentary earplugs. In the middle of the night, you're jolted awake by the bells again. The monks rise for vigils, filing into the church like solemn ghosts. Some pilgrims stir, grumbling. Others join, chasing holiness with bleary eyes. You debate whether to follow. Historians still argue whether night prayers uplifted the spirit or just tested the spine. You decide that tonight, the holiest act might be simply lying still and not adding your groans to the choir. When dawn comes, bread and weak ale are served. It's rough but sustaining, and the monks press small wooden tokens into pilgrims' hands, symbols of blessing and safe travel. You pocket yours, feeling the grooves carved into its surface, a reminder that even the simplest objects carry weight when given by hands devoted to centuries of ritual. As you step back onto the road, the bells toll once more behind you. The priory shrinks into the distance, smoke curling lazily into the morning sky. Your stomach may be empty again in an hour, your feet blistered anew, But for this moment, you carry the faint peace of stone walls, candlelight, and the knowledge that strangers sheltered you without question. Back on the road, you notice the atmosphere shift. Pilgrims straighten their cloaks, brush dust from their hems, and speak more softly as the outline of a shrine emerges ahead. Word has traveled quickly. This one houses a particularly important relic, and along with it, a particularly hungry donation box. The shrine itself is modest. A squat stone chapel perched at the edge of the path, its roof patched with thatch, its doorway dark and narrow. Inside, a small altar glimmers under candlelight. You squeeze in with the crowd, jostled by elbows and the muffled coughs of weary travelers. The air is heavy with the smell of wax, damp wool, and hope. At the center rests a reliquary, a golden casket no larger than a shoebox, studded with colored glass, pretending to be jewels. A monk beside it assures everyone in a sonorous voice that it holds the bones of a saint, though which saint depends on whom you ask. Historians still argue whether these relics were authentic or simply clever fabrications to attract pilgrims. Considering how many original bones seem to exist across Europe, you suspect saints must have had a surplus of spare ribs. One by one, pilgrims shuffle forward. A widow drops 2 coins into a carved box and presses her forehead to the reliquary. A child reaches out with trembling fingers before being nudged aside by a burly merchant eager to prove his devotion. The knight from your group mutters something about the relic being smaller than he expected, though he still tosses a silver coin into the box with exaggerated flair. You step closer, noticing the slot of the donation chest is worn smooth, polished by thousands of offerings. The wood around it is dark with the touch of countless hands. You slip in a coin yourself, wincing at the hollow sound it makes. For a fleeting moment, you imagine the saint inside, sighing with disappointment at the size of your gift. Beyond the reliquary stand rows of candles, some stubs, some tall and fresh. A friar hovers with a tray, offering to light one for you in exchange for a few more coins. You decline politely, though the flames themselves mesmerize you. The way they flicker, the way they turn every wrinkle and shadow into something soft and holy. One quirky tidbit you overhear. Some shrines reportedly kept wax from melted pilgrim candles and sold it again the next day. Recycling, it seems, was alive and well even in the Middle Ages. Kneeling, you murmur a prayer, though your mind drifts toward more practical wishes. Unblistered feet, edible stew, maybe a cloak that doesn't smell of wet sheep. Still, when you rise, you feel oddly lighter, as though even half-hearted prayers have a way of carrying some burden off your shoulders. Outside, the path widens into a courtyard buzzing with voices. Pilgrims compare experiences, boasting about how long they prayed or how many coins they gave. Some pin their new badges proudly to their cloaks. The mystic from your group stands apart, chanting fervently, oblivious to the commerce around him. You can't help smirking, realizing shrines were both places of devotion and tourist attractions, spiritual centers and economic engines. Historians still debate whether more pilgrims came for miracles or for markets, but in truth, it was probably both. As the sun dips low, you glance back one last time. The shrine glows against the twilight, candlelight spilling through the doorway like molten gold. The reliquary inside might hold a saint's bone, or it might hold a chicken bone polished smooth. Either way, it has gathered the prayers of countless pilgrims, and that, authentic or not, feels like something sacred. The shrine fades behind you, but its aura lingers in the chatter of pilgrims clutching their new souvenirs. As the road curves into a cluster of trees, the crowd thins and small stalls reappear, this time not for pewter badges or scallop shells, but for objects whispered about with reverence and suspicion alike. Amulets and charms. A peddler waves a string of wolf teeth on leather cords, claiming they'll protect wearers from wild beasts and thieves. You wonder if wolves ever got the memo, or if they simply saw their cousin's teeth dangling from cloaks and felt insulted. Historians still argue whether such amulets were viewed as superstition or tolerated under the broad umbrella of folk Christianity. Either way, pilgrims buy them eagerly, pressing coins into the man's hand before draping the grim tokens around their necks. Another stall offers palm-sized wooden crosses, crudely carved but sturdy. The seller insists each has touched holy water. You squint at his bucket of holy liquid, which looks suspiciously like yesterday's rain. Still, a mother purchases one for her child, tying it to his belt as if it were armor. A quirky tidbit surfaces in your memory. Some charms included herbs sewn into pouches, sage, rosemary, even lavender, believed to ward off fevers or bad dreams. You find a vendor hawking just such sachets, their scent strong enough to mask the aroma of unwashed cloaks. Further down, a toothless woman chants as she waves sprigs of dried plants, selling them as talismans against evil eyes. She claims the herbs came from a sacred mountain, though you notice weeds of the same variety growing right behind her stall. A barefoot pilgrim argues that real protection comes only from relics, not charms, sparking a debate that draws a crowd. Scholars might phrase it more delicately, but you think it boils down to relics were church-approved souvenirs, charms were the DIY version. You pause at a table where small metal discs glint. The seller whispers that they bear engravings of saints, hammered under the full moon for extra potency. You pick one up, the etched lines wobbly but earnest. A tiny hole at the top suggests it's meant to be strung on a cord. For a moment, you imagine yourself wearing it proudly, though the saint's expression looks more confused than protective. Among the stalls, stories flow as freely as merchandise. A man swears his amulet cured him of toothache. Another insists his charm made bandits flee without a fight. Historians still debate whether these tales spread from genuine belief or crafty marketing, but you recognize them for what they are, the medieval version of customer reviews. Eventually, curiosity wins. You hand over a coin for a pouch of dried herbs tied with red string. The seller assures you it will keep away fevers, demons, and possibly annoying travel companions. You tuck it into your pack, comforted less by its power than by the thought that at least your bag will smell like rosemary instead of wet leather. As evening falls, the amulet sellers close their stalls, tying bundles with twine and packing goods into carts. Pilgrims walk away clutching their new tokens, cloaks jangling with wolf teeth, herbs perfuming the air, wooden crosses tapping against hips. Trinkets may not guarantee safety, but they stitch a sense of protection into the weary fabric of the journey. You smile at the thought. A road full of pilgrims, each bristling with charms like walking charm bracelets, all marching toward the next promise of holiness. The road narrows again, twisting between marshy meadows where the ground squelches underfoot. Ahead, you hear the groan of timbers and the splash of water, signs of a river crossing. Pilgrims crowd closer, sensing the kind of obstacle that always manages to drain both purses and patience. Sure enough, the bridge appears, a crooked wooden span sagging in the middle, watched over by a pair of guards who look far too smug for men holding pikes. As you shuffle in a line, one guard bellows the toll fee, rattling a small chest already heavy with coins. The knight grumbles about highway robbery, though he pays anyway. A barefoot mystic insists his prayers should be sufficient payment. The guards reply that God may be merciful, but the bridge repairs aren't. Historians still argue whether tolls were genuine necessities for upkeep or thinly veiled excuses for lords to fatten their coffers. Looking at the splintering planks beneath your feet, you suspect repairs were more theory than practice. You finally step onto the bridge, boards creaking ominously. The river churns below, brown and swollen from the recent rains. One plank shifts under your sandal, and you picture yourself baptized unwillingly in the current. You grip the rope railing so hard you could leave fingerprints in it. Somewhere behind you, a merchant shouts that the saints will protect him. A plank promptly cracks under his mule's hoof, and the animal refuses to budge until coaxed with a loaf of bread. Halfway across, you pause to watch geese bobbing on the water. One waddles onto the bank and struts directly toward the line of pilgrims, bold as a highwayman. A child tosses crumbs from his pouch, only to squeal as the bird lunges and snatches the entire bag. The goose honks triumphantly, flapping off like a feathered bandit. Laughter ripples through the group, though you suspect the child won't be forgiving poultry anytime soon. At the far end, another guard holds out his hand, just in case anyone missed a chance to pay. You mutter that if saints can multiply loaves and fishes, surely someone could multiply bridges. The guard frowns, unamused, and you drop a coin before shuffling on. A quirky tidbit drifts to mind. Some rivers had ferrymen who doubled as storytellers, entertaining travelers with tall tales while rowing them across. You imagine this bridge's guards telling stories only about how rich they'll be by dusk. Beyond the crossing, pilgrims scatter into a meadow to rest. Some shake mud from their boots, others wring water from cloaks. You sit on a fallen log, relieved to feel solid ground again. Beside you, the widow counts her remaining coins with a sigh. The mystic, barefoot as always, smiles serenely as if tolls and blisters were blessings in disguise. You resist the urge to ask if he'd still say that with your sandal strap. As twilight deepens, the river glimmers like liquid bronze, its surface calm after a day of swallowing toll money and goose crumbs. You rise, tightening your cloak. Bridges may test wallets more than faith, but every crossing pushes you further from home and closer to whatever miracles or disappointments wait at journey's end. Not long after leaving the toll bridge behind, you hear a rumor ripple through the line of pilgrims. Someone swears there's a spring up ahead that heals headaches, stomach pains, maybe even bad attitudes. You raise an eyebrow. If true, half this company will soon be cured of everything from bunions to bad breath. The road dips into a hollow, and sure enough, you find a trickle of water bubbling out of a mossy stone, collected in a shallow basin. Pilgrims crowd around like bees to honey, cupping hands and filling wooden flasks. You kneel and scoop a mouthful yourself. The taste is metallic, sharp on the tongue, like you've just licked a handful of nails. You wince, swallowing anyway. A mystic near you sighs with bliss, declaring that saints surely blessed the spring. A knight spits dramatically into the grass, grumbling that it tastes like a blacksmith's wash basin. Historians still argue whether these miracle springs were natural mineral waters or carefully staged shrines designed to lure weary travelers. Whatever the truth, they worked. Pilgrims flocked, prayed, and left coins in the collection bowls left conveniently nearby. A friar squats beside the spring, chanting prayers and assuring everyone that headaches will vanish within the hour. You rub your temples, half hoping, half mocking the idea. The widow from your group drinks deeply, then claims her heart feels lighter. You nod politely, though you suspect that's more the result of sharing her grief yesterday than the flavor of iron water. A quirky tidbit circulates among the crowd. Some springs were said to bubble wine instead of water on certain holy days. You picture yourself cupping hands full of vintage claret, then laugh at the likelihood. If such a spring existed, it would be surrounded by taverns, not chapels. Nearby, a merchant sells tiny vials of the spring water, corked and wrapped in cloth. He charges more than a meal's worth of coins for each, insisting they'll bring blessings home to families. You watch as buyers line up eagerly, clutching their purchases as though they'd bought liquid gold. You can't help wondering if, by tomorrow, the water will just taste like rusty rain to everyone back home. Still, the ritual has its own charm. Children dip scallop shells into the basin, letting drops trickle onto their heads. An old woman washes her feet, sighing as if each blister melts away. Even skeptics linger, caught between laughter and longing. The act of gathering around water, of believing together, has its own power. Historians may debate the authenticity of miracles, but the sense of community, that shared hush of anticipation, is undeniable. You sit on a rock, letting the sun dry your damp cloak. The spring burbles on, steady and unconcerned with belief or doubt. Whether it cures headaches or not, it certainly quenches thirst, and on a road this long, that may be miracle enough. You wipe your mouth, grimacing at the aftertaste of rust, and rise to your feet. The journey stretches ahead, promises of other shrines and stories waiting. Behind you, The spring gurgles like quiet laughter, as though amused at how easily humans can find holiness in a puddle. The road bends toward a cluster of tents and wagons, and before long, the smell hits you. Roasted meat, sharp spices, and that unmistakable tang of livestock all crammed together. You've stumbled on a market day in a country town, and the scene is as chaotic as it is colorful. Pilgrims, merchants, farmers, and beggars all collide here, and for a moment you forget your blisters, dazzled by the sheer noise of it all. Stalls stretch in every direction, their rough cloth awnings flapping in the breeze. A spice seller waves a packet of saffron under your nose, insisting it came directly from the east. You know enough to doubt it, but the golden threads glitter temptingly. Historians still argue whether most medieval Europeans had access to genuine spices or if they were often fobbed off with cheap substitutes. Judging by this man's shifty eyes, you suspect the latter. A cloth merchant unfurls bolts of fabric dyed in rich blues and reds. The crowd gasps. Bright colors scream wealth in a world where most people wear endless shades of brown. You run your fingers over the cloth, smooth and fine, before the merchant tells you the price. You nearly choke. Clearly, looking fashionable on pilgrimage costs more than your entire pack of coins could cover. Then comes the food. A man grills sausages over an open flame, their skins bursting with fat. The smell alone nearly convinces you, until you hear him shout that they contain only the finest cuts. A woman beside you mutters that in this town, finest cuts probably means hooves and snouts. You decide to let the mystic test them first. He eats with rapture, declaring them divine, though you're not sure whether that's holiness or indigestion. One quirky tidbit catches your attention: a stall pile with candied almonds, their surfaces glistening like jewels. A vendor claims they'll keep travelers awake during long nights. Children swarm the stall, their sticky fingers already a testament to the treat's popularity. You splurge on a handful, crunching the sugar shell and letting the sweetness chase away the memory of rusty spring water from earlier. The market is more than goods. It's a theater of human life. A juggler tosses knives dangerously close to the heads of gawking pilgrims. A storyteller chants a ballad about Charlemagne, stretching history. So far it sounds more like a fantasy novel. A fortune teller sits in the corner, her cards spread on a cloth, promising to predict whether you'll reach Santiago or simply Santiago's taverns. Crowds push and pull, laughter and shouts rising above the din. Pickpockets lurk here too. You feel a tug at your pouch and spin just in time to glare at a boy darting away. You pat your coins, relieved, and tuck them deeper under your cloak. Historians note that medieval markets were hotbeds of theft as much as trade. You suspect most pilgrims lost more coins here than at toll bridges. As dusk falls, torches ignite, casting a golden glow over stalls. Smoke rises, thick with the mingled aromas of spice, meat, and sweat. The market thrums like a beating heart, overwhelming and alive. You weave through the last of the stalls, pockets lighter, cloak now carrying the faint scent of saffron and sugar. You step back onto the road, ears ringing from the din, mind buzzing with images of painted cloth, candied almonds, and sausages of questionable origin. Behind you, the market fades into night, leaving only the echo of bargaining voices. Ahead lies the quieter rhythm of pilgrimage once more, but for a brief afternoon, you tasted the chaotic carnival of medieval trade, a reminder that on the long road to holiness, commerce always finds a way to squeeze itself in. The road stretches quieter now, fields rolling out under a dusk sky streaked with violet. Pilgrims shuffle on with bellies full of market food and purses lighter than they'd like. As night settles, fires flicker here and there along the path, and soon you find yourself drawn toward the warm glow of a gathering. Not merchants this time, but storytellers and singers, the lifeblood of a weary traveler's evening. You sink onto the grass with others, forming a loose circle around a man cradling a lute. He plucks a soft tune, the notes thin but sweet, mingling with the crackle of the fire. His voice rises, telling of Roland and his horn at Roncesvalles. The words stretch long, verses winding like the road itself. You realize quickly that this song isn't finishing anytime soon. Historians still argue whether such epics were memorized fully or improvised nightly, judging by how often the singer repeats the phrase. And so they wrote on. You suspect improvisation plays a heavy hand. Beside him, another bard begins a tale of King Arthur. Except in this version, Arthur seems to have owned a miraculous chicken that laid golden eggs. You lean back, amused, realizing how easily myths evolve when carried mouth to mouth across countries. A quirky tidbit you recall. Medieval storytellers sometimes mixed current gossip with legends, slipping in references to local scandals for extra laughs. Tonight, one singer makes a jab at a tax collector in the crowd, and the roar of laughter suggests the man wasn't popular. Children giggle as a jongleur juggles 3 wooden cups, nearly dropping them into the fire. He recovers with a bow so dramatic it makes the widow in your group clap until her hands redden. The knight throws a coin into his cap, though not before muttering that he's seen better juggling at a campaign camp. The mystic simply stares at the flames, lips moving in silent prayer, oblivious to the merriment. The night deepens, and the songs grow slower, softer. A woman with a voice like smoke sings a ballad of lost love, her words stretching into the night air until you feel the ache of her melody more than you hear it. Some pilgrims wipe their eyes, others simply sigh. You find yourself swaying with the tune, eyelids heavy. Historians note that pilgrim gatherings were often as much about companionship as faith. Tonight proves it true. You feel the sting of blisters fade beneath the balm of music, laughter, and shared stories. It's not the relics or the trinkets that knit people together, but the rhythm of voices in the dark, echoing through smoke and starlight. As the fire dwindles, the circle loosens. Some stretch out to sleep on the grass, others shuffle back to the road. You linger, watching the last sparks drift upward like tiny stars. Somewhere in the distance, another group begins a hymn, the sound faint but clear against the night. You lie back, letting music and stories settle into your bones. Tomorrow will bring new aches, new tolls, new shrines. But tonight, you carry the comfort of voices telling stories as old as the road itself. Morning dawns, but the warmth of last night's music quickly fades into the harsher realities of the road. The path today winds through a narrow village street, chickens darting across your feet, dogs barking as though announcing every new pilgrim to the world. But the mood of the group shifts uneasily. Whispers spread. Pickpockets lurk here, and not all relics are quite what they seem. You clutch your pouch a little tighter as the crowd slows near a stall, claiming to sell splinters of the true cross. The vendor waves tiny slivers of wood, wrapped in cloth, boasting that each piece is authentic, blessed, and absolutely guaranteed. You imagine if all the splinters across Europe were gathered together, they could probably build an entire forest, not just one cross. Historians still argue whether pilgrims truly believed or knowingly played along, treating relics as tokens of faith regardless of their origin. Further down the lane, you see a different sort of trickery. A man dressed in ragged robes pretends to be a fellow pilgrim, limping dramatically, groaning about needing alms. You almost feel pity until you spot the glint of coins hidden beneath his sleeve. The knight notices too and mutters curses under his breath. Pilgrims step aside, some suspicious, others still dropping pennies into his outstretched hand. A quirky tidbit from chroniclers. Entire groups of professional beggars traveled pilgrimage routes, earning more from sympathy than from honest labor. You edge closer to your companions, wary. The widow whispers that she heard about thieves who cut purse strings with hidden blades while pretending to brush past. You nod, sliding your pouch deeper under your cloak. At that moment, a commotion breaks out. A pilgrim shouts that his coins are gone. The crowd swells, fingers pointing, accusations flying, until the supposed thief melts away into the alley like smoke. You sigh. The road may promise holiness, but it delivers equal shares of mischief. Not all dangers wear human faces. Fleas have begun their quiet conquest. You scratch absent-mindedly at your ankle, then glance around and see others doing the same dance. Shared fires and crowded inns are breeding grounds for the little tormentors. One friar jokes that fleas are simply reminders from God not to get too comfortable. You disagree vehemently as another bite blossoms behind your knee. By midday, the group trudges past a small shrine said to house a saint's tooth. The reliquary gleams enticingly, but you notice the relic itself looks suspiciously like it belonged to a sheep. The monk guarding it insists it is genuine, voice dripping with solemnity. The barefoot mystic kneels reverently while the knight smirks. You can't help but laugh quietly. Pilgrimage, it seems, is as much about suspension of disbelief as about faith itself. Historians often point out that medieval pilgrims faced a constant tension between devotion and deception. Walking through this village, you feel that tug keenly. For every honest shrine, a dozen charlatans wait with holy trinkets carved yesterday. For every generous meal shared, a purse goes missing in the dark. Yet still, pilgrims come, because even the chance of touching the sacred outweighs the certainty of blisters, fleas, and fraud. As dusk settles, the group presses onward, eager to leave the village behind. You glance back at its crooked rooftops, half expecting to see the fake beggar watching, counting his coins. Instead, only smoke rises from chimneys, curling lazily into the night. The dangers of the road remain, but so does your determination. Even pickpockets and counterfeit relics can't turn you back now. The next day brings a sight that silences even the loudest complainers. A cathedral rising out of the landscape like some giant skeleton of stone and timber. From miles away, you see the spire thrusting skyward, half-finished and bristling with scaffolding. As you draw closer, the scale overwhelms you. Each block of limestone looks heavy enough to flatten an ox. Yet somehow teams of masons have stacked them higher and higher, crafting walls that seem more dream than structure. The road funnels you and the other pilgrims straight toward the construction site. The clang of chisels on stone echoes through the air, mingling with the creak of wooden cranes and the occasional bark command of a master mason. Dust swirls around your ankles, coating cloaks and hair with a fine white powder. For a moment, you imagine the entire world turning to chalk. Historians still argue whether these massive projects were driven more by civic pride or pure devotion. Looking up at the half-finished spire, you suspect pride had plenty to do with it. Pilgrims like you would tell stories of what they saw, and those stories would ripple outward, reminding everyone that this town, this church, reached higher than its neighbors. A quirky tidbit you overhear. One mason boasts that if the spire is finished, it will be taller than any tree in the kingdom. You hope for his sake lightning doesn't get jealous. Closer now, you pass under the scaffolding itself, timbers lashed together with ropes thick as your wrist. The whole structure groans in the wind, like an old man stretching stiff joints. You quicken your pace instinctively, imagining what it would feel like to be flattened by God's work in progress. Pilgrims before you mutter prayers as they duck through, and you add a quick one yourself, half serious, half sarcastic. Inside the nave, though, the atmosphere changes. Even unfinished, the cathedral dwarfs you. The pillars soar like petrified trees, shafts of light spilling through half-set windows. Workers scramble over ladders, while monks guide pilgrims toward makeshift chapels tucked between scaffolds. You kneel briefly, hearing the whisper of prayers swirl up into the dusty rafters. Somehow, even surrounded by tools and grit, the space already hums with holiness. The knight from your group gazes upward, awe etched on his mud-caked face. The widow clasps her hands tightly, whispering thanks. The barefoot mystic stares so long at the half-built roof you worry he'll declare a vision. For once, nobody argues, nobody bargains. Everyone is simply stunned. Of course, commerce lurks nearby. Outside the cathedral walls, vendors sell miniature carvings of the building itself, crude but charming. You spot wooden models with tiny crooked spires, pewter charms stamped with the church's name, even scraps of stone supposedly chipped from the walls. You smirk, Pilgrims never leave empty-handed if sellers have their way. As evening falls, the workers climb down, their tools ringing against stone. Fires spark to life around the cathedral shadow, and pilgrims bed down on the grass. You roll onto your back, staring at the skeleton of the spire silhouetted against stars. For a moment, it looks less like stone and more like a ladder reaching to heaven. Whether built from devotion, pride, or sheer stubbornness, you can't help but marvel that humans, blistered and battered as they are, still dream upward. Morning light finds you among the vendors who cluster like barnacles around the half-built cathedral. Their stalls brim not with food or tools this time, but with strange souvenirs made from whatever nature or imagination provides. Trinkets here are more eccentric than the scallop shells and pewter badges of earlier stops. These are curiosities designed to catch the weary pilgrim's eye and the hopeful heart. One peddler thrusts a feather under your nose, claiming it fell from an angel who visited the cathedral at dawn. You study the object. It looks suspiciously like the feather of a common goose, maybe even the same breed that robbed pilgrims of breadcrumbs back at the river. Historians still argue whether such items were truly sold in good faith or as deliberate frauds. Judging by the sly grin on this seller's face, you lean toward fraud. Next stall, strings of beads in every hue. The vendor swears each bead was polished in a holy spring, making them conduits of divine blessing. You roll one between your fingers, smooth as river stone, cool against your skin. A widow nearby buys a strand eagerly, tying it around her wrist with trembling hands. A quirky tidbit: archaeologists have found beads buried with pilgrims centuries later, suggesting many treasured them long after the journey ended. Further down, a man rattles a pouch of animal bones. He declares them relics of holy martyrs until a child blurts that they look like chicken bones from last night's stew. The man flushes, mutters about mysteries of the saints, and quickly lowers his price. You can't help laughing, realizing children have always been the best detectors of nonsense. Nearby, another seller hawks tiny bottles filled with sand, claiming it comes from the Holy Land. You wonder how many donkeys it would take to carry back enough sand to supply every roadside stall in Europe. The barefoot mystic eagerly presses coins into the man's hand, clutching his bottle like treasure. Faith, you reflect, has a way of transforming even the most ordinary dust. The noise of the market blends with the sound of masons still at work on the cathedral above. Chisels strike rhythmically, creating a strange harmony with the peddler's cries. You move from stall to stall, pockets lighter, cloak now adorned with a bead and a feather. You're not sure if either offers protection, but at least they add some flair to your otherwise mud-stained attire. As the sun climbs high, the crowd thins. Sellers pack their goods into carts, tying bundles of bones, feathers, and beads with twine. Pilgrims drift back to the road, their cloaks jangling faintly with new souvenirs. You step away, glancing once more at the spire overhead. Trinkets may be dubious, even laughable, but they carry stories, and stories, like beads on a string, hold pilgrimages together. By evening, when you lay down in a field, you finger the smooth bead you bought, wondering who polished it, who sold it, who once believed in its power. Maybe tomorrow you'll tuck into a pouch, or maybe you'll carry it until the end. Either way, it has joined your journey, as much a part of the road as your blistered sandals and your whispered prayers. You rejoin the road with a purposeful clink, because now your cloak and hat carry proof that you're not just wandering. You're progressing. The first badge you notice isn't even your own. It's pinned to a farmer's felt cap, a gleaming pewter sword that wobbles when he laughs. You study it with the curiosity of a magpie, then look down at your own scallop shell and smile at the way it swings from your cloak cord like a tiny, portable horizon. Pilgrim badges and souvenir shells. This is the language of the road, grammar written in tin and thread. Vendors have been molding these tokens all along the routes, and you've watched the process more than once. A ladle of molten pewter, really a lead tin mix, poured into a two-part mold, the edges filed, a little loop left at the top to catch a pin or a stitch. Mainstream histories point out that from the 12th to the 16th century, these badges were everywhere. Cheap enough for peasants, plentiful enough for the crowd, specific enough to proclaim, "I made it to there." Canterbury, little ampoules shaped like bottles. Rome, keys of St. Peter. Santiago, the shell of St. James. Even half a mile from a shrine, you can tell who's been where by reading their hats like travelogues. You pause to help the widow adjust the piece she bought, an ampulla stamped with a tiny cross. The little bottle once held a drop of holy water. Now holds mostly air and a smudge of hope. She asks if yours is real shell or market shell. You shrug. Historians still argue whether most Santiago shells truly came from Galician shores or from whatever coastline a clever merchant could reach with a basket and strong ankles. Either way, the symbol is the thing. A shell on a pilgrim is like a passport stamp that also keeps the sun from fraying your hat brim. Ahead, a peddler lays out a cloth crowded with badges. Hands, swords, crowns, tiny churches, even a ship with sails so delicate they look ready to catch the evening breeze. He swears each has touched a relic. You raise an eyebrow, recalling the shrine custodian who insisted his saint had 4 left thumbs. Still, the price is low, and the pleasure of pinning progress to your cloak is high. You buy a little church, crooked spire and all, and jab the pin through the wool. The metal is cool against your fingers. Your cloak answers with a faint, satisfied weight. Around you, pilgrims celebrate each new addition with a brief ceremony of pride. A boy crows when his father fastens a badge shaped like a stag. Their family's protector, he says. A group of French travelers sport matching shells lined across their caps like a formation of silver birds. The barefoot mystic wears nothing but a plain wooden cross, and yet even he glances at the sparkle on other people's hats with a flicker of human wanting. The badges speak, but they also sing, because each one carries a story. You remember the old mason by the cathedral who showed you a mold engraved with a saint's head. He claimed the mold itself was a relic, then winked so broadly you nearly saw the joke from behind. A quirky tidbit you picked up at a fireside. Some pilgrims, worried about theft on the way home, melted their badges down and sprinkled the metal into their bathwater, believing the sacred touch would soak into their skin more securely than any pin could hold it. If true, it's the earliest wearable tech, except the battery is faith and the user manual says immerse yourself. By mid-afternoon, the road has become a catwalk of tin. A woman strides past with a fan of shells sewn to her shoulder, each rattling like applause. Your own new badge bobs whenever you breathe, and you secretly enjoy the sound. It tells you you're still moving, still gathering small proof that you were here. The knight eyes his collection, 3 badges, 1 shell, and declares himself a walking reliquary. Someone suggests he's more of a jangling pantry, which earns a rare snore of laughter from the man who usually only laughs when ale is present. First joke of the day landed. Your cloak approves. There's utility hiding in the ornament, too. You watch a pilgrim use a broken badge to wedge a wobbly sandal strap back into place. Improvised cobbling that would make a cordwainer weep and applaud at the same time. Another pins a shell over a tear in her cloak. The wind tugs, the shell holds, and she grins like she's outsmarted the weather. Badges, you realize, are also little tools, emergency fasteners that double as bragging rights. If duct tape had existed, it would have come stamped with St. James. Even the placement matters. Hats advertise like billboards. Cloaks whisper like signatures. You pin yours high on the left, so passers-by will catch the glint as you approach, and perhaps step aside on narrow stretches of mud. Spoiler, they don't. A merchant insists that 2 shells together guarantee safe bridges. You think about the toll keepers and decide 2 shells guarantee conversation pieces, which is at least free. Second joke of the day earned a smile from the widow. Progress measured in grins counts, too. With badges come debates. A friar warns about counterfeit marks, badges stamped by unauthorized hands, indulgences claimed where none were granted. Historians still argue whether badges ever served as formal proof for spiritual privileges or were simply souvenirs with a nudge of blessing. You listen, thumb tracing the crooked spire on your new piece, and decide that, even if the paperwork is fuzzy, the memory feels official. Memory often is the best notary. You pass a stall selling shells dyed with vegetable colors. Rose, saffron, a green that looks like captured meadow. Children swarm it, and you half expect a regulation monk to appear with a color chart and a frown. No monk, only delighted squeals, and one unfortunate attempt to taste the dye. The child's tongue turns as green as spring wheat. The mother sighs, you stifle a laugh, and the vendor assures everyone it's blessed chlorophyll. Third joke of the day, even a mystic smiles without noticing his smile. As sunset brushes the hedges with copper, the badges catch the light and flash in chorus. You think of all the hands that made them, the mold carvers, the pewterers with singed fingers, the sellers with quick patter, the buyers with slower steps afterward, because a little more metal means a little more weight. You imagine the years ahead when these pieces will hang on cottage walls, tucked above hearths. Testimony that the wearer once walked past fields and geese and cathedrals and muddy kindness, and kept going. Somewhere behind you, you hear a soft clatter and turn to find your scallop has fallen. You retrieve it from the dust, brush it clean, and pin it more securely. A simple gesture, but it feels like a vow renewed, onward, one jangling inch at a time. You rejoin the flow, your small tin church tapping the shell with every step, a pilgrim's metronome, keeping time with the road. By the time stars wake, your hat and cloak carry a modest constellation of their own. Not many, not expensive, but distinctly yours. Historians can keep their arguments. For you, the meaning is practical and tender. The badges remember when your feet would rather forget, and the shell says the sea is in your pocket, even when there's only dust underfoot. You settle near a hedge, cloak around shoulders, pins chiming softly as you breathe. Every glint, every tap, a lullaby of proof. Yes, you walked, and yes, you're still walking. You wake with your cloak still jangling faintly from the badges pinned along the hem, a metallic reminder of yesterday's small victories. The road ahead, however, promises less solemnity and more noise. You soon spy a cluster of taverns perched beside the path like thirsty birds, their signs swinging in the morning breeze. A carved boar here, a crooked star there, symbols more legible than any written word for the many travelers who couldn't read. By midday, you find yourself inside one, pulled in by the smell of yeast, smoke, and the low thrum of dice hitting wood. The tavern is dim, its air thick with spilled ale and roasted meat. Long benches stretch from wall to wall. Pilgrims press shoulder to shoulder with merchants, tinkers, even a few locals eyeing the crowd warily. A pot of stew bubbles over the fire, and a serving girl sloshes mugs of beer onto tables with the precision of a practiced juggler. The moment you sit, a pair of dice clatter down before you, pushed by a grinning farmer whose face suggests he's already deep into his winnings or his losses. Your turn, he says, slurring just enough to make you nervous. You cup the dice, feeling the worn edges, and give them a shake. They tumble across the table, landing on a neat pair of fives. The crowd roars, half in envy, half in cheer. A small pile of bread crusts is pushed your way, the agreed prize, apparently. You stare at the hard, stale lumps, realizing medieval gambling is less Vegas, more win tonight's dinner scraps. Historians note that taverns were hotspots of both merriment and mischief, offering travelers warmth, food, and the risk of losing what little they carried. And always, there were games, dice, cards in later centuries, even simple contests of riddles or drinking. Tonight is no exception. The knight bellows for another round, swearing he'll win back the coin he lost at the bridge toll. The widow politely declines, sipping her ale in quiet dignity. The barefoot mystic, oddly enough, sits at the far end of the table, eyes closed, whispering prayers as if dice themselves are instruments of temptation. The games escalate. Coins clink, bread crusts pile, and one drunk insists on betting his boots, which are so worn nobody accepts. The serving girl laughs, shaking her head, and mutters that saints might forgive sins, but they won't fix bad shoes. A quirky tidbit you recall: clerics frequently condemn dice games as gateways to sin, yet archaeological digs have uncovered dice all along pilgrim routes. In other words, what was forbidden was also wildly popular, humanity's favorite paradox. As the night deepens, laughter grows rowdy. Someone strums a lute, striking a tune that mixes awkwardly with the shouting. A man swears his dice are blessed by Street Christopher himself. Another counters that they must be cursed, given how many times they betrayed him. Historians still argue whether pilgrims gambled to pass the time or to court a bit of fortune on journeys that offered little certainty. You decide it hardly matters. The tavern's energy is contagious. Its mix of chance and camaraderie almost enough to drown out your sore feet. Eventually, you push away from the table, pockets no richer, bread no fresher. The knight snores where he sits, head tipped back, while the mystic finally rises, declaring the whole tavern a den of temptation. You smile, shaking your head. In truth, the games have left you lighter in spirit, if not in coin. Stepping outside, the night air cools your flushed face. Stars prick the sky, and the murmur of dice still rattles faintly from within. On the road again tomorrow, you'll carry the memory of laughter, wagers, and stale bread victories, a reminder that even pilgrims needed play. Morning comes with stiff legs and the faint tang of ale still clinging to your breath. You step back onto the path, only to be reminded that the true masters of the road are not pilgrims, but animals. The track ahead is a parade of hooves, paws, and feathers, each beast stubbornly convinced the path was built for them. First come the ox carts, their wheels sunk deep into ruts carved by centuries of traffic. The oxen plod with the patience of saints, though their eyes look permanently unimpressed. One swishes its tail, smacking you across the face with a clump of mud. The driver laughs, tossing you a half-hearted apology. Historians remind us that oxen were the backbone of medieval transport, pulling loads from timber to wine barrels. Today, they seem more interested in pulling your patience apart, one swish at a time. Next, a flock of geese waddles onto the road, honking as if leading their own miniature pilgrimage. They strut fearlessly between legs and carts, snapping at crumbs dropped from pilgrim pouches. One particularly bold goose makes off with a crust of your bread before you can react. The barefoot mystic chuckles, muttering that even the birds must share in God's bounty. You disagree, glaring at the thief with feathers. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Medieval households sometimes kept geese as watchdogs because of their loud cries. Judging by this flock's volume, no thief would dare sneak up, except, apparently, the geese themselves. Dogs pad alongside pilgrims, ribs showing but tails wagging. They dart after scraps, bark at oxen, and circle the group like scruffy guardians. One curls up beside the widow's feet whenever she rests, adopting her as his pilgrim. She shares bits of cheese with him, smiling for the first time in days. Historians still argue whether these dogs belong to travelers or simply joined the road opportunistically, trading loyalty for food. You suspect the latter, but the warmth in the widow's eyes says it hardly matters. Horses pass occasionally, ridden by wealthier travelers. Their hooves thunder, scattering chickens and pigeons from the roadside. One knight's steed gleams as if polished daily, its bridle jingling with tiny bells. The contrast between this sleek animal and your own blistered feet feels almost insulting. You mutter under your breath that at least you don't need a shovel to clean up after yourself. Crows circle above, watching the procession with greedy eyes. When a bag of grain splits open, they descend in a black flurry, cawing and pecking until the road looks like a battlefield of feathers. Pilgrims wave their arms helplessly, trying to salvage what they can. The friar jokes that crows are God's tax collectors, always taking their share. You laugh because it's hard not to when even the birds seem to demand tolls. The day rolls on with constant animal interruptions. Sheep blocking the road, pigs squealing as they're herded to market, cats darting under carts. You begin to wonder whether the pilgrimage is less about relics and more about dodging creatures determined to trip you. And yet, amid the chaos, there's comfort. The presence of animals, loud and stubborn as they are, fills the road with life. Their sounds mingle with footsteps and voices, a reminder that this journey isn't just human, but a tapestry of every living thing trudging through mud and dust together. By dusk, you find yourself sharing a crust of bread with a widow's adopted dog, who stares at you with eyes full of gratitude. You scratch behind his ears, smiling despite yourself. Perhaps the mystic is right. The road belongs to all creatures, feathered, furred, or blistered. The day begins with the usual shuffle of feet and jingling of badges, but soon a different sound rises. The voice of a local woman hawking cures from a basket slung over her arm. For coughs, for fevers, for your poor, tired bones, she sings, waving a vial of cloudy liquid. You lean closer out of curiosity, catching the scent of wine mingled with snails. She explains earnestly that a few snails steeped in wine will soothe any throat. You're not sure whether to laugh or gag. The road has always doubled as a traveling pharmacy, every village boasting its own remedies. Pilgrims eagerly swap recipes. Moss scraped from church walls for wounds, ground nettles for headaches, even spider webs packed into cuts to stop bleeding. You scratch your ankle, eyeing the nearest hedge suspiciously, half expecting someone to declare it a miracle cure-all. Historians still argue whether these practices counted as medicine, superstition, or simply desperate improvisation. At a crossroads, a bearded man sells little bundles of dried herbs, each tied with red string. He insists the plants carry blessings from a hermit who lived in the hills. One bundle smells like rosemary, another like damp hay. You overhear a pilgrim swear that moss boiled in ale cured his cousin's melancholy. Another mutters that swallowing live minnows is good for stomach cramps. You make a mental note never to dine at his house. One quirky tidbit from chroniclers. Medieval people sometimes ground dried toads into powder, mixing it with wine to ward off plague. You glance at your flask and feel grateful that, so far, no one has offered you amphibian seasoning. As the day wears on, remedies seem to multiply. A friar tells of a monastery where monks prescribed powdered pearls for toothache. A merchant swears by carrying onions in his pocket to repel illness. The barefoot mystic, of course, declares that only prayer cures the soul and body alike. He then proceeds to cough violently into his sleeve. The knight raises an eyebrow, but says nothing, sipping wine that smells distinctly of snails. The oddest display appears at dusk when you pass through a hamlet boasting a healing well. Villagers urge pilgrims to wash their eyes with the water, claiming it brightens sight. A group of travelers splashes eagerly, laughing as droplets sparkle in the fading light. You try it yourself, blinking as cool water runs down your cheeks. Your eyes don't feel sharper, but the refreshment is undeniable. Historians still debate whether such wells were genuine mineral springs or clever ways to attract weary wanderers. Either way, they turn suffering into an opportunity for community. As you lay down that night beneath a hedge, you reflect on the parade of cures, some earnest, some absurd. Blisters may not vanish, fevers may still burn, but each remedy carries with it a kind of faith. And perhaps that's the real medicine. The belief that the road, no matter how painful, still offers small ways to ease the journey. The road feels lighter today, maybe because pilgrims are already talking about home. Not the aches of their feet or the relics waiting ahead, but what they'll carry back when the journey is done. A new kind of commerce appears, more cheerful than tolls or fake relics. Gifts for the people waiting behind cottage doors and hearth fires. At the first cluster of stalls, ribbons flutter like trapped rainbows. A woman with quick hands weaves them into pilgrims' hair, laughing that each color carries a blessing. You finger a strip of bright blue, rough but vibrant, imagining how it will look tied around a child's wrist back home. Historians still argue whether colored ribbons carried symbolic meaning, love, luck, or loyalty, or whether they were simply cheerful novelties. Either way, the crowd can't resist. Further along, a beekeeper sells jars of honey, thick and golden, sunlight captured in clay. He assures everyone the bees themselves prayed over the flowers. You buy a small jar, though you're careful not to tilt it. The cork looks more like wishful thinking than a secure seal. A quirky tidbit you recall. Medieval honey was sometimes mixed with herbs and given as medicine for sore throats or even broken hearts. Sweetness, it seems, was considered medicinal. Children tug at their parents' cloaks, begging for painted wooden toys. A merchant shows off tiny carved horses, each no bigger than your thumb. He makes them gallop across the table, and the watching crowd laughs despite sore legs. The widow buys one quietly, tucking it deep into her pack, no doubt thinking of children waiting far away. Not all gifts are cheerful. Some pilgrims purchase small crucifixes or prayer books to leave at family graves, tokens of devotion carried across hundreds of miles. One man boasts that he'll bring back a lock of hair blessed at Santiago, though you suspect it looks more like horsehair than anything holy. Historians still debate how many of these gifts actually held spiritual power and how many were simply meant to prove you'd been somewhere extraordinary. Foodstuffs tempt you as well. At a stall brimming with dried fruits, you nibble a fig that tastes of sun and dust. The seller claims it came all the way from Italy. Judging by its chewiness, you suspect it may have also lived a previous life as a doorstop. Still, you buy a handful, thinking of how a few pieces tucked into a pouch might brighten a loved one's winter meal. The barefoot mystic refuses all purchases, declaring worldly goods a distraction. Yet you catch him gazing longingly at a bundle of lavender tied with twine. Perhaps even holy men enjoy the promise of sweetness waiting at home. The knight, on the other hand, buys a carved horn cup, loudly declaring it will be his proof of the journey. He then fills it immediately with ale and sloshes half onto his boots. By evening, your pack bulges oddly. Ribbons, honey, a tiny carved bird you couldn't resist. The gifts feel heavier than their size, weighted with the thought of the smiles they'll spark back home. As you walk, you imagine the moment of unwrapping, of stories told over a fire, of children clutching trinkets as if they were relics themselves. The road ahead is still long, but tonight you carry not just prayers and blisters, but the quiet joy of imagining how even the smallest souvenirs can turn hardship into memory and memory into love. The road bends through rolling hills, and with the evening comes the sound of voices spinning stories. Pilgrims settle along the grass, fires lit, and the night air fills not only with smoke, but with legends, some sacred, some strange, all embroidered with a bright thread of imagination. You lean closer, eager to catch every word. The first tale begins with a booming-voiced merchant. He insists that giants once built the bridges pilgrims now cross, their stone arches too massive for ordinary men. He gestures dramatically toward a crumbling span nearby, swearing its stones still bear the giant's fingerprints. Historians still argue whether such legends grew from awe at medieval engineering or from older pagan myths that never quite died. You sip your ale, smiling at the thought of giants working as unpaid masons. Another pilgrim counters with the tale of a saint who tamed a wolf terrorizing a village. According to him, the beast not only ceased attacking, but eventually carried the saint's pack on pilgrimage. A quirky tidbit. Similar legends appear across Europe, saints befriending bears, deer, even lions, turning dangerous animals into holy companions. You imagine what it would feel like to hand your blistered shoes to a wolf and say, "Your turn." The barefoot mystic adds his own tale, voice low and hypnotic. He speaks of angels who disguise themselves as beggars, testing the kindness of pilgrims. He warns that refusing to share bread might mean refusing heaven itself. The widow listens intently, clutching her little wooden toy tighter. You realize stories here are more than entertainment. They're moral lessons wrapped in adventure. Children press closer as another voice rises, this one weaving a story of dragons nesting in cathedral spires. The knight scoffs loudly, declaring dragons nonsense, though you notice even he glances upward uneasily at the half-finished spire nearby. Legends, it seems, still bite. You remember a quirky detail whispered at an inn. Some pilgrims swore they saw ghostly processions on the road, armies of spirits marching silently at night. Was it imagination, exhaustion, or too much ale? Historians still debate, but as the wind whistles through the trees, you pull your cloak tighter, just in case. The stories ripple into laughter, awe, and quiet reflection. Some tales contradict each other. One pilgrim insists a saint's relic healed blindness, while another swears it caused it. Nobody minds. The truth isn't the point. What matters is the shared moment, the way legends stitch strangers together like patches on a worn cloak. As the fires burn lower, the voices soften. You lie back, staring at stars, still hearing echoes of giants lifting stones, wolves padding beside saints, angels hidden in rags. The road is long, but it hums with stories, and stories are as nourishing as bread. Perhaps even more so. They turn mud into magic, blisters into badges, and tired pilgrims into part of something larger. Southward you go, and the sun decides to become a character in your story. Loud, bossy, and very bad at subtlety. Morning begins with a glow on the horizon, but by midday the light hardens, flattening hills into cutouts and turning every stone into a tiny furnace underfoot. You loosen your cloak's clasp, then finally admit defeat and roll the wool tight, strapping it to your pack. The road itself seems to shimmer, a wavering ribbon where heat and dust negotiate a truce and invite you to cough. The first lesson of a long march south is fabric. Wool has been a stalwart friend through rain and sleet, but it's now an oven with sleeves. A stall near a crossroads saves you. Scraps of linen in off-white, dove gray, and a hopeful pale blue. You buy a narrow length, twist it into a head wrap, and feel the instant mercy of shade across your brow. Mainstream history backs the instinct. Linen was prized in warmer regions for its breathability, while wool held the northern line against cold and damp. You help the widow knot a square over her hair, and the fabric drinks the sweat away like a courteous guest mopping up a spill. The second lesson is rhythm. North you tramped steadily. South you learned to move like the day does. Early, pause late. At noon, the landscape itself goes quiet. Donkeys wilt under fig trees, dogs pant in slabs of shade. Even geese, your old feathered felons, fall silent except for a half-hearted honk that sounds like a yawn. A farmer waves you toward a stone trough where water glints, and you drink slowly, remembering the blacksmith's wash basin tang of that miracle spring. This time the water tastes clean, with a chalky whisper, the kind that leaves a cool ghost on your tongue. Someone passes a skin of watered wine, safer than raw well water, they say, and you take a cautious pull. A friar suggests a dab of vinegar in the mix to settle the humors, a time-worn traveler's trick that makes your lips purse like you're kissing a lemon. A quirky tidbit comes from a tinker who swears that placing a smooth pebble under your tongue keeps thirst at bay by teasing the mouth to salivate. You consider it, remembering the pebble rumor from your first day, and decide your mouth has endured enough unusual experiments for one pilgrimage. By afternoon, the road hoards brightness. Dust lifts in lazy puffs from every step and settles on your scallop shell, turning it the color of bread crust. Your badges warm against your cloak, miniature suns that click together when you breathe. You tug the head wrap lower and feel blessedly anonymous under its pale brim of shadow. Historians still argue whether wide-brimmed hats or simple coifs were more common for pilgrims in hot regions. Whatever the verdict, shade is devoutly practical, and you genuflect to a hat maker if one appeared with decent straw. When the path dips through olive groves, everything softens. The leaves show two faces, dark green above, silvery below, so the slightest breeze flips entire branches into flickers of light. You walk between the trunks, gnarled and dignified, their roots like old knuckles gripping the earth. A farmer sells a cup of brined olives, and you fish one out, bracing for the brine's bright slap. Salt wakes your tongue. You feel your body nod in relief. The widow buys a jar to carry home, imagining, perhaps, winter suppers that will taste like sun. Heat changes talk the way rain changes mud. In the cool north, pilgrims debated relics and fake beggars. Here conversations shrink to sips and shade. The knight, who once thundered about tolls and dice, reduces his commentary to a single sentence. I am melting in my armor that I left at home. Everyone agrees, enthusiastically. You joke that if the cathedral spire you admired were here, the masons would build it from shadow instead of stone, and the group laughs just enough to count as exercise. First joke of the section, gentle like the breeze you keep imagining. You pass a small wayside chapel with its door flung open. Inside, the stone is 30 degrees kinder, and the candle flames look content rather than desperate. A monk seated near a basin offers a dab of scented oil to travelers. Rose, he says, pressed by careful hands. The scent threads through the heat and clings at your wrists, a reminder that comfort can be measured in small mercies. He sells tiny linen squares, too, blessed and hemmed, for the brow at noon. You buy one, dab the rose oil, and feel oddly regal for a person whose ankles are the color of dust. Clothing adapts in other ways. You see tunics hitched with cord to let air pass at the knees, sandals retied to free a swollen toe, sleeves slit at the seam and laced loosely back. Someone has cut their woolen hood into a makeshift shoulder cape, proof that fashion innovation thrives when sweat is involved. A merchant shows off a thin shirt he calls cerise cloth, a swaggering word for silk. Your fingers tell you it's just very fine linen, but the myth cools him as much as the fabric does. Second joke arrives when he claims the shirt wards off sunburn and taxes. If it handles taxes, you say, "Sell me too." He grins, then quietly admits the sunburn part is optimistic. Food alters too. Cheese comes softer, bread flatter, herbs brighter. You chew a sprig of fennel handed over a fence by a smiling grandmother who repeats an old saying that fennel sharpens sight. The barefoot mystic, eyes half closed, intones that he can now see your soul. The knight replies he can now see his own nose. Laughter breezes through the group, and for a moment the road feels cooler. By late day, when the light turns honey-colored, you learn the trick of long shadows. You walk inside them like corridors, shifting from hedge to wall to tree and back to hedge, always choosing darkness by a hand's breadth. The habit feels monkish, meditative. Your steps fall into the softest cadence you've known since leaving home, like the road has finally matched your heartbeat. A signboard appears at a village edge, painted with a sun and a water jar. Then behind it keeps a low stone room where pitchers stay cool. You sit, feeling the day pour off your shoulders. The innkeeper brings a plate of olives, a wedge of goat cheese, and a heel of bread with the crust that explodes like summer thunder. You eat slowly, letting salt and cool blend into something like gratitude. Mainstream accounts mention how southern routes braided with trade in oil, wine, and fruit. Tonight, you taste the braid, the way sustenance turns to memory at the back of the tongue. At the next table, two locals argue whether the great pilgrim roads were first beaten by Roman sandals or by shepherds chasing summer pasture. Historians still argue whether specific stretches owe more to imperial engineering or older foot wisdom. You imagine both are true, layered like sediment, each step riding over the last but never erasing it. You tip your mug, honoring unknown feet. Night settles. The stars arrive quicker in the clear air, bright and nosy. You unroll your wool at last. Now a blanket, not a burden, and lie back in the courtyard. Head on your linen square, wrists faintly rosy with a monk's perfume. Somewhere a gecko ticks like a wooden clock. Somewhere else a dog sighs the loud, theatrical sigh of a creature who has perfected leisure. Third joke arrives when the knight complains that even the crickets are too hot to chirp. At once a chorus erupts outside the wall, as if to prove him wrong. He lifts a hand in surrender, and you smile into the dark. Before sleep, you finger the bead from the cathedral market, warmed by the day, in your scallop shell, now dust soft. You think of the different weathers stitched into your cloak. Rain that wrote blisters, winds that rang through scaffold boards, sun that bleached linen into light. South has taught you a quieter bravado. Leave early, hide at noon, walk again when shadows grow long. Tomorrow will repeat the lesson, and that's fine. A pilgrimage, like linen, breathes best when you don't fight it. You close your eyes and let the road, warm as bread, keep rising beneath you even in dreams. By now, your cloak clinks like a traveling chandelier. Every time you shift your shoulders, badges tap together. Pewter saints, tiny churches, one scallop shell dulled with dust. Around you, the same chorus repeats, each pilgrim jangling their progress for all to see. And of course, where there's display, there's rivalry. Pilgrim rivalries are subtle but sharp, stitched not in daggers but in tokens and tales. It begins innocently enough. A farmer brags about how his scallop shell was taken from the true beach at Santiago, not from some knockoff coast. He points at yours with a grin, asking whether it's Galician or just conveniently local. You shrug, though your pride bristles. Historians still argue whether most shells were imported or mass-produced, but here on the dusty road, it feels like everyone wants theirs to shine brighter. The knight strides beside you, tapping his collection like medals on a soldier's chest. He boasts of shrines visited, relics touched, and coins donated. The barefoot mystic simply raises his wooden cross, muttering that his one token outshines all their pewter trinkets. The widow, tired of the bickering, chuckles that she'll declare victory when someone can show a badge that keeps stew warm. A quirky tidbit drifts into your mind. Some pilgrims really did test their badge's worthiness by using them to ladle soup or pin cloaks shut, turning symbols of faith into kitchen utensils. At rest stops, the rivalry intensifies. Pilgrims spread out their collections like traders at a fair. Tiny bottles of holy water, badges stamped with saints, even small chunks of stone chipped from cathedrals. One man claims his badge glows faintly in moonlight. You eye it later that night. Unsurprisingly, it looks just like dull pewter. Still, his pride is unshakable. Historians note that badges often became conversation starters, a medieval version of comparing postcards or fridge magnets. The laughter sometimes tips an edge. A young pilgrim sneers at an older man's crooked badge, whispering that it must have been forged by a drunk smith. The older man scowls but says nothing. Rivalry thrives because pride and fatigue mix into a potent stew, and every token feels like proof that your suffering was worth something. You find yourself caught in the game despite your better judgment. When asked how many shrines you've passed, you puff up and list each one, maybe stretching the truth about how long you prayed at them. The friar nods approvingly, though his eyes twinkle as if he knows exactly how much exaggeration clings to every pilgrim's story. Yet the rivalry has its sweetness too. Pilgrims swap badges, trade shells, even gift trinkets to children. A boy beams when the knight pins a spare pewter cross to his cloak, his grin brighter than the metal itself. You catch the widow passing her tiny carved horse to a girl who has none, whispering that joy travels lighter when it's shared. By evening, the road is alive with clinks, laughter, and the faint sting of jealousy. You pin your scallop shell higher on your cloak, proud yet weary of the comparisons. Perhaps tomorrow someone will boast louder, or collect more tokens, or pray longer. But tonight, as you lie back beneath the stars, the rivalry softens into camaraderie. Every badge, every shell, every wooden cross is proof of a single truth. You're still here, still walking, still part of this strange, jangling procession. The road quiets after yesterday's badge bragging, but soon another kind of sound rises to fill the space. Music, not the solemn chanting of monks, not the clatter of market stalls, but the living, foot-tapping kind. A piper appears first, his cheeks puffing as he coaxes a reedy wail from a set of bagpipes patched with leather. Then a drummer joins, beating rhythm on a skin stretched so tightly it sounds like thunder stuffed into a barrel. Before long, the entire road seems to march to their tune. You fall in a step, realizing how easily music reshapes the journey. Blisters ache less when each thud of your sandal lands in time with the drum. The widow sways slightly, her wooden toy dangling from her pouch like a pendulum keeping the beat. Even the knight, usually so stiff, begins tapping his fingers on his belt. Historians still argue whether pipers and drummers traveled deliberately with pilgrim groups or simply wandered alongside to earn coins. Either way, their presence lifts spirits faster than relics ever could. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some medieval travelers carried small bells, ringing them as they walked, not only to scare off thieves, but to create a kind of walking orchestra. You glance around, amused at how the jingling of badges and scalloped shells almost makes the rumor true. Every pilgrim is an accidental musician, their steps adding to the melody of the road. As the sun climbs higher, the piper shifts his tune. He plays a lively jig, and children dart forward, hopping awkwardly in the dust. Their laughter infects the crowd, even those too tired to join. A friar claps along, his hands off rhythm but enthusiastic. You chuckle, noting that even fatigue can't resist music's pull. Later, as the group rests in a shaded clearing, the drummer flips his instrument over and uses it as a stool. He explains proudly that the drum skin was stretched from a goat he once owned. You sip water and decide not to ask whether the goat consented. The piper, meanwhile, boasts that his pipes were once patched with sheep guts strong enough to hold forever. He grins and taps the bag, which promptly wheezes out a note so mournful it silences everyone before bursting them into laughter. Historians note that medieval music was rarely confined to courts or churches. It spilled into roadsides, taverns, and pilgrim camps. Tonight proves it true. When the fires are lit, the piper and drummer play again, joined by a fiddler who emerges from the crowd like he's been waiting all along. Their tunes shift from brisk marches to slow laments, carrying the company through moods of joy and melancholy alike. The barefoot mystic closes his eyes, swaying as though the rhythm itself is prayer. The knight, encouraged by ale, stomps in something that might be a dance, though it looks more like armorless battle practice. The widow hums softly, her voice weaving with the instruments until even you feel carried by it, drifting on sound as surely as on footsteps. When you finally stretch out under the stars, the echo of drum beats lingers in your bones. Your ears still ring faintly, not from tolls or scolding monks, but from a road turned into a concert hall. Music has walked beside you today, steady as any companion, reminding you that even blistered feet can find joy in rhythm. The music fades with the dawn, replaced by hushed anticipation. Word has spread down the line of pilgrims. Today you will see a reliquary famous across the region. The chatter grows reverent, even among the normally skeptical. Your own pulse quickens as the crowd funnels toward a looming church whose bell tower peaks above the trees. Inside, the air is cool and scented with incense, so thick it clings to your throat. Pilgrims press forward, voices dropping to whispers, eyes wide as though stepping into the very vault of heaven. Candles flicker along the aisles, their wax puddled into tiny stalagmites at the base of brass holders. Ahead, beneath an arch embroidered with gold leaf, rests the prize, a reliquary said to contain the bones of a saint. It is dazzling, jeweled, gilded, shaped like a miniature cathedral. Glass panels reveal tiny fragments. A tooth, perhaps a finger, maybe just shards of bone polished smooth by centuries of devotion. Historians still argue whether such relics were genuine remains or carefully curated fakes. Some bones were undoubtedly real, others suspiciously convenient. You can't help imagining the saint somewhere in the afterlife, bemused that so many bits of his anatomy seem to have multiplied like loaves and fishes. Pilgrims surge forward, coins clinking into the donation box. A friar intones blessings, his voice rolling like distant thunder. The widow clasps her hands tightly, tears pricking her eyes. The knight bows stiffly, though he sneaks a glance at how many coins others give before dropping in his own. The barefoot mystic collapses to his knees, face alight with fervor. You approach slowly, studying the reliquary. The glass catches the candlelight, scattering tiny stars across the stone walls. The fragments inside rest quietly, oblivious to centuries of longing heaped upon them. You place a coin in the chest, touch the cool metal casing, and whisper a prayer that mixes more sarcasm than sanctity. Please, Saint whoever, keep my sandals intact. A fellow pilgrim beside you snorts softly in agreement. One quirky tidbit you overhear. Some reliquaries were said to perform miracles only if you looked at them from a specific angle. Pilgrims would crane their necks, squinting sideways, convinced holiness depended on perspective. You try for yourself, left, right, squint, and feel no different though you nearly trip over your neighbor's foot. Perhaps the miracle is simply surviving the crowd. Beyond a reliquary, stalls sell miniature replicas in pewter and wood. Children beg for them, parents oblige, and soon the road outside jingles with tiny copies of the box you just touched. You shake your head, amused at how quickly sacred awe turns into marketplace chatter. Historians note this duality often. Relics inspired devotion, but also fueled thriving economies. Standing there, hearing the clink of coins, you believe it. As you leave the church, the sun blinds you for a moment, a stark contrast to the candlelit hush inside. Pilgrims spill into the courtyard, some glowing with faith, others simply relieved to be free of the crush. You linger, glancing back one last time. Whether saintly bone or carefully polished pebble, the reliquary has done its work. It bound strangers together in awe, in hope, in the shared silence of belief. The reliquary fades into memory as the road stretches onward, but soon another familiar sight reappears. The last gauntlet of trinket stalls before the shrine-rich region gives way to the long trek home. These sellers know weary pilgrims can't resist one final keepsake, and they pounce with well-practiced voices. "Charm for safe return," shouts a man waving a tiny silver-colored pendant. You squint. It glitters convincingly, but the weight in your hand feels suspiciously like lead. He assures you it has been blessed thrice, though his blessing sounds more like a sneeze. Historians still argue whether such last-chance souvenirs were genuine devotional objects or just clever ways to siphon coins from travelers too tired to haggle. You're leaning toward the latter. Another stall overflows with wooden tokens, hearts, crosses, even clumsy animals. A girl carves them on the spot, her knife flashing as curls would fall at her feet. The figures are crude but charming. You pick up a lopsided bird, its beak oddly shaped like a potato. The barefoot mystic declares it beautiful, seeing divine mystery in its form. You see potato bird, but you smile and hand over a coin anyway. A particularly pushy vendor thrusts a pouch into your hands. "Saintly dust," he whispers. You peek inside, gray powder that looks remarkably like the road itself. You joke aloud that maybe he swept it directly from under your sandals. A few pilgrims laugh. The vendor doesn't. He lowers the price. That earns the first chuckle of the day from you, though you decline to carry a bag of dirt you already have clinging to your cloak. One quirky tidbit you overhear. Some pilgrims sought charms shaped like body parts, legs, arms, eyes, offered as prayers for healing. Sure enough, you find a tray of pewter legs and eyes, each small enough to sew onto a cloak. You finger a tiny foot, thinking how fitting it would be after weeks of blistered marching. The widow buys an eye, murmuring that it might help her son's failing sight back home. Around you, bargaining begins in earnest. A knight waves a coin, demanding a sturdier clasp for his cloak. A merchant haggles over a rosary carved from bone. Children swarm a basket of shells painted in garish colors, shrieking with delight. The noise is overwhelming, like a fairground stripped of rides, but full of urgency. Everyone wants one last relic, one last story, one last glittering scrap to carry home. Historians note that many pilgrims value these final purchases most, not for their holiness, but for their timing. They mark the completion of a journey, a tangible exhale after miles of strain. You feel that truth yourself as you pin the potato bird to your cloak, its crooked beak catching the sunlight. It doesn't matter if it's sacred or silly. It says you endured, and now you're nearly done. As the stalls fade behind, the road grows quieter. Trinkets jingle on cloaks, pockets bulge with tokens, and pilgrims walk with lighter steps. Whether lead or silver, wood or shell, each charm carries a weight of memory far heavier than its material. You pat your lopsided bird and grin. Holiness, after all, sometimes looks like a mistake carved with love. The air feels different now, lighter, though not on your legs. Those remain stubbornly blistered and sore. What lightens is the mood. You're finally turning homeward. The reliquaries and shrines lie behind. The last trinket stalls are fading, and the road stretches out not toward relics but hearths. The return journey begins. At first, pilgrims walk with renewed vigor, chattering like children let out of school. Cloaks jangle with badges, pouches bulge with charms, and everyone seems eager to compare what they've gathered. The knight points proudly to the pewter, crosses glittering on his hat. The widow fingers her tiny carved horse, murmuring about the joy it will bring at home. The barefoot mystic, of course, insists that he needs nothing but the cross of his suffering, though even he smiles faintly as the road bends away from the cathedral spires. But lightness soon gives way to the familiar trials. The same mud still lurks in hollows, the same tolls wait at bridges, and the same fleas follow with missionary zeal. One pilgrim sighs that going home feels exactly like leaving home, only heavier. He pats his pouch with a grimace, lighter in coin, heavier in keepsakes. Historians still argue whether pilgrims truly sought change of soul or simply souvenirs to prove the miles. Walking here, you feel the answer is both, tangled like the straps of your sandals. Along the road, villagers greet you differently. No longer are you strangers heading for shrines. You are returnees, trophies pinned to cloaks, evidence that you reached the sacred and survived. Children point at your scallop shell, tugging at their mother's sleeves. An old man bows his head when he sees your badges, murmuring a blessing. Even if your trinkets were carved yesterday, they shine as proof of endurance. At taverns, the dice still clatter, but the laughter has a softer edge. Pilgrims gamble less fiercely, hoarding coins for the final miles. Songs shift too, from hopeful hymns to weary ballads about hearths and warm beds. One quirky tidbit you recall: some pilgrims on the way back wore their badges reversed, pins facing inward to turn their prayers homeward. You try it yourself with your crooked potato bird, its beak now pressed against your cloak like it's whispering directions. The road is quieter at night. Around the fire, stories circle back to beginnings. The blisters of the first week, the onion stew in the smoky inn, the goose that stole a child's bread. You laugh again at old jokes, realizing the road has given you a new family of sorts. Temporary, but bonded by shared mud and miracles. As villages grow more familiar, the chatter slows. Faces turn inward. Pilgrims think of reunions, of telling stories by their own firesides, of handing over gifts purchased with aching steps. You too, imagine loosening your pack at home, spreading out ribbons, honey jars, and badges while loved ones listen wide-eyed. The return journey may be the same miles in reverse, but it feels like a new pilgrimage altogether. One that points not toward relics and saints, but toward memory, belonging, and the simple relief of your own bed. The road narrows into familiar hedges, and the smell of chimney smoke drifts faintly on the breeze. Your steps slow, not from fatigue, but from the tug of recognition. At last you are homeward, carrying the dust of distant shrines in your cloak and the weight of countless trinkets in your pack. The crowd of pilgrims has thinned. Some turned toward their own villages days ago, others pressed on further. Now you walk almost alone, a jangle of badges the only chorus to accompany your thoughts. When you finally reach your door, the hearth smoke curls like a welcome banner. Inside, the room glows with lamplight. You drop your pack heavily on the bench and begin to unpack the odd collection of treasures. Out comes the scallop shell, dulled but proud. The pewter badges clatter onto the table, saints' faces bent and crooked from weeks of wear. A jar of honey, its cork miraculously intact, glimmers like captured sunlight. And of course, the lopsided wooden bird with its potato-shaped beak. Your family crowds near, wide-eyed. Children gasp at the tokens, tracing them with small fingers as though touching relics themselves. A neighbor leans in, listening raptly as you recount stories. The goose that robbed your bread, the mystic who called blisters holy, the dice games where you won only stale crusts. You stretch the tales with gentle humor, letting the laughter outweigh the hardship. Historians remind us that Pilgrim souvenirs often lived above hearths for decades, pinned to beams or tucked into chests. They became family heirlooms, proof that someone once braved the road. You imagine your crooked bird hanging above this fire, not as gold or silver, but as memory, faith carved into wood, laughter etched into flaws. That night, lying by the hearth, you feel the rhythm of the road echo in your bones. Not the blisters, not the mud, not the toll keepers or fleas, but the shared prayers, the songs at campfires, the hush before reliquaries. You close your eyes, smiling at how even the oddest trinkets, badges, shells, charms, carry the weight of belonging. The pilgrimage is over, yet its cadence hums on, softer now, like the last ember glowing in the hearth. The fire dims, shadows lengthen across the walls, and the voices of the road fade into whispers. You imagine the steady tread of feet becoming slower, softer, until each step dissolves into stillness. The scallop shell rests quietly by your bedside, badges no longer clinking, charms no longer rattling. They lie in peace, as you do now, folded into warmth. Breathe deeper. Let the weight of the pack slip away. Feel your body unlaced from the miles, your heart loosening from the road chatter. Every relic, every story, every crumb of bread carried you here, and here is enough. Picture yourself by the fire, the wooden bird perched above, watching with its crooked beak. Outside, the world grows quiet. Inside, the glow softens, steady as a lullaby. The road has ended, but its memory rocks you gently, a cradle of dust, song, and kindness. And so you rest, safe within your own walls, with the comfort of knowing you walked, you endured, and you returned. The journey lingers only as a dream, drifting softly into sleep.